there's often a phrase that's thrown around of like, we change at the speed of pain, and so oftentimes the pain of having a loved one leave us or having a relationship end really spurs the desire to make the phone call. So first and foremost, it's my hope that if you're listening to this and this is you, just avoid the pain. Just call.
Pick it up. Pick it up. Pick it up.
Howdy, everyone. It's your host, Polly Siegel. And for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, certified addiction specialist, and master level trained mindfulness practitioner. I own a counseling practice in both Colorado and Illinois, and I specialize in trauma, OCD, and anxiety. If you live in either of those two states, feel free to reach out to me for a consultation and we can begin the therapeutic journey together. Now on to the good shit. Welcome to season 3 of Shit Talkin' Shrinks. Gosh, I'm so excited. I will be featuring experts in the healing space, and we're discussing a variety of mental health topics, the human experience, and society at large, while creating levity along the way. Get ready to laugh, learn a lot, and change your life for good. Hello, everyone. Another episode of Shit Talking Shrinks. And I have like a personal friend on that rarely happens in Shit Talking Shrinks, where I get to be like, I am actually friends with my guest and I love him and he's incredible. And we are all lucky to have Ed Tilton, which I will do a formal introduction, but first had to just say how fucking amazing you are.
I really feel that, and sending it the other direction as well. It's our friendship has been just like a constant presence and been part of the best pieces of my life since we met. I mean, it's crazy to think, but we've been friends for 7 years now.
It's a long time. And I'm not sure why he originally became my friend, but alas, here we are. You're still my friend.
Yeah. Well, it's easy when you meet people and you recognize not only are you smart and funny, but you have a passion and you're creative. And at the time you were, I don't want to say just a therapist, but you weren't a podcast host and leading a revolution of just education and self-improvement. So all of those things at the time were just like really good reasons to start a great friendship and to stay connected.
I'll cry later. Okay, so for all the listeners, Ed Tilton, here's how impressive he is. He has an advanced degree in healthcare management and is the president of the Begin Again Institute. For anyone who doesn't know the Begin Again Institute, it specializes in intimacy disorders, providing intensive healing for sex and porn addiction. And as you might suspect, that is what we're talking about today, is sex addiction and porn addiction. And so this isn't funny, but it's kind of funny. Like, it seems like sex addiction would be fun. Like if someone's like a heroin addict, like that's not fun. But sex addiction seems fun.
I would say that sex addiction is always one of those things that falls in line with every other addiction, which is that it starts off being something of avoidance, numbing, or pleasure until it's not. And I think it's one of the things that keeps people from getting help, to be honest with you. I think that whether it be Hollywood or the media or just people's perception, it kind of falls into one of two polarizing categories. It's either pleasurable or it's predatory. So either you're 50 Shades of Grey, and if you're talking about, everybody's like, yeah, who doesn't love great sex? Who doesn't love, a good time? Or you're falling into this place of like, pedophilia shouldn't be around schools. People are worried about, they're worried about their kids. And the reality is sex addiction falls into the same misery and suffering that every other addiction does.
Yeah, no, and obviously me making that joke, it's a real issue and it's something that causes immense chaos and pain. But it could be, I could see how people might be skeptical of sex addiction and be like, is that really real? Is this just another label we're creating? Is this just another addiction that society now is focusing on? I have felt the skepticism from people.
Oh, absolutely. And what I would say is I can't speak for everybody that claims to have a sex addiction, because there probably are people out there that are using it as a cop out, or they're using it in ways that aren't really diagnosable. So whether it's problematic sexual behavior, meaning that some part of your sexuality and acting out behavior is causing you problems in relationship, or if it really is hitting all those markers of what the DSM would consider to be a disorder, that you're using it for longer periods or more frequently than you intended to. You're using it despite adverse consequences or adverse issues in relationships. You're starting to do it in ways that are dangerous to you or others. You probably made promises to yourself or a loved one and continue to do it. These are some of the markers that say this is sex addiction. And for the guys that are coming to Begin Again Institute, they've definitely hit those pieces of saying, like, I've tried everything. I've read every self-help book. I've done all the worksheets. I've done all the quick fixes, and nothing's working. And so, that's one of the things that Begin Again does differently, though, is we're not in the business of chasing symptoms. We're in the business of really kind of focusing on source solutions. So we specialize in we specialize in a 2-week trauma focused intensive that happens to specialize in intimacy disorders. We're not an intimacy disorder program that's trying to be trauma focused. And for us, like, the difference is everything. It means that we're going to the source of where you started to feel a need to numb, escape, or in a lot of cases just feel different. And that's what happens when you're in a pervasive and ongoing traumatic environment early in childhood, is that for a lot of our guys, they're really looking, at 5, 6, 7 years old to go, all of this stress and this discomfort, I hate it. What's something that I have access to that gets me to feel different? In a lot of cases, it's not even like I want to feel better. It's just I don't want to feel this.
Right. Well, and I want to go back to your definition because it's pretty expansive, which is good. Is it sounds like what's creating the major interference is that there's a desire to not be engaging in these behaviors, but the inability to control it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Whereas I think when we think about sex, it's like, well, sex is biological, it's evolutionary, it is part of Maslow's hierarchy. Like, we need sex, our brain is wired and primed for it. And naturally, people seek it out and want it and crave it. But I don't think that's the inherent problem. It's more about I'm doing it in ways that are creating havoc in my life, that are creating disruption in my life, and I can't control it or scale back. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. And the litmus test is really when the two kind of come in conflict with each other, right? So I love the person that I'm with. All other behaviors show that this is a person that I want to build a life with or that I care deeply for. Yet I'm deleting text messages, I'm lying about where I'm at. I have a fake account on dating sites or whatever. I mean, it really starts to become, in a lot of split life, that most men are creating a lot. They're creating what I would almost call like the he and the me. You know, you are in a relationship with me most of the time. And I love you and I care about you and I want, you know, I have kids with you, I have a family with you. Like you're the person. And then there's this other he. And he is the one that's looking at pornography. He is the one that's having the affair. He is, and the reality is that's just not how humans work.
Mm-hmm. You're using, just like you're highlighting the experience for a man, but I would imagine you can also have sex addiction if you identify as a woman.
Absolutely.
Okay. So it doesn't discriminate against sex or gender.
No, absolutely not. At this point in time, though, Just Begin Again works with men. So that was my point of reference. So, but it absolutely is felt by all genders. And it should be highlighted that the betrayal that is felt by the person in the relationship who's not experiencing the addiction is not they're not void of suffering. Betrayal trauma, when a discovery is had, is incredibly painful. And the symptoms of that, they mimic PTSD responses. They mimic a lot of mental health concerns. And so it really should be shared with anybody who's experiencing this, even if you were the partner of the person who's suffering an intimacy disorder. You too should have support and help in your own journey in recovery. This isn't just a one-sided addiction.
Right. Well, here's my burning question, and it has two parts. First part is, can you have just sex addiction without porn addiction, or have porn addiction without sex addiction?
In a lot of cases, it's easiest just to look at this from a dopamine addiction. That there are certain pathways in which the person has established the way in which they get the dopamine. And so we've worked with guys that have never looked at pornography. We've also worked with guys that have never had sex. So it really, it can really fall in one camp or the other. In most cases, it's a mixture of both. Typically what I would say is what we expect to see, or what I expect to see now with the newer generations and high-speed internet and virtual reality headsets and everything that's advancing. Pornography is easily accessible. It's anonymous. It's affordable. It's going to be the way, or it's going to be the entry point to most intimacy disorders moving in the future.
Right. Okay. So you can have either or. They don't necessarily come as a guaranteed package.
Exactly. Yeah.
Why is it not in the DSM? If thousands of people are suffering and there's treatment programs, what's the disconnect there?
That's a really great question. I think it will be in the DSM. I think it just with everything that I think with every evolution of an addiction, it starts with really society saying, hey, this is a problem. And then having to go through a series of, red tape or approval processes.
Right.
So I do think that it'll be in the DSM in the future. I don't think that it'll be called intimacy disorder. I think it'll be called something of, problematic sexual behavior or compulsive sexual behavior.
When I asked it, I don't know if there's a perfect or right answer to it, but I think what I would imagine is that it takes a lot of data, and there's a lot of clinical trials and just hard evidence that needs to be experienced by professionals to then be able to take that to, the DSM board, and they have to find it to be valid and viable, and then begin to consider it or actually create the diagnosis. Like, because sex is just normalized and it has so much prevalency in westernized culture, I'm sure that the natural skepticism probably comes in of, can you really be struggling with something that's just, natural and normal? But I think my understanding too is that the DSM has to have a lot of concrete evidence before it's willing to create a label for it.
I mean, it's recognized on a global scale. It's not recognized in the DSM yet. So unfortunately, what you bring up though is a real big piece because it's not recognized in the DSM, it actually starts to act as a large barrier for people being able to use insurance to treat this issue. So not only do we see a great need, but we also see a large barrier with people not being able to use their insurance to cover this.
Right. Because if you don't have a billable diagnosis, then sure the insurance is not going to cover it, which is really, really sad, because if thousands of people are struggling with this and they can't use their health care and they don't have the financial means for cash pay, that's a big fucking problem.
There are organizations, one of which I'm affiliated with. I'm on the board of directors at SASH, which is the Society for Advancement of Sexual Health. And it really is working to, not only recognize problematic sexual behavior as a larger issue, but also provide education, and education, ease of access to treatment, and just preventative measures, because this is in a society that's starting to get more into screens and more into technology. We really need to have safeguards, just to ensure your kids are watching what you think they're watching. They're engaging in platforms the way that you think that they're engaging in platforms. If you're monitoring their physical world, there should be a way that you are at least monitoring or aware of what they're engaging in the digital world.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity to take this seriously and look at like what are the ways to begin to prevent this. I don't know if there's certainly not a way to prevent addiction altogether. There's not a perfect formula, but there are probably things that could help reduce it developing into a disorder. I want to take a quick pause to talk about our sponsor, a company called BetterHelp. It's an online therapy platform where all the therapists are licensed and accredited professionals. It's affordable. You pay a low flat fee for therapy with your therapist, and it's convenient. Do it at your own time and at your own pace, and you can communicate with your therapist as much as you want and whenever you feel is needed. And more importantly, it's effective. Thousands of people have benefited from therapy using BetterHelp, and we're really grateful to offer all of our listeners 10% off your first month. So if you're interested in receiving therapy ASAP, click the link in our show notes and you can get started. And you get to save money. I think for listeners, there might be just this burning question of like, well, how does it typically present? Like, what are you noticing as you're this higher level of care and working with these clients? What does it look like?
There's a number of guys that come through our program. Some of them are just addicted to pornography. Some of them are in the realm of, hey, there's some porn addiction. There's also some affairs or massage parlors, or sex worker related behaviors. There's also some that are in, if you want to call it remission, you could maybe phrase it that way, but sexual anorexia. So that they've actually kind of gone the opposite end of the spectrum of, hey, the way that I've engaged in sex has caused me problems, so now I'm going to be void of sex or sexual behavior. And obviously, too much of one thing can be a problem, and too little of another thing can also be a problem. So removing, that can also be an issue as well. The discovery, the way in which people discover this can vary from person to person. So sometimes this is, finding secret browser history. Sometimes this is as extreme as finding out that your husband or wife of many, many years has another family in a different state. So we also see folks that don't necessarily identify at first as having difficulty with intimacy disorders, because they've had multi-year affairs and said, well, this is what it is, without necessarily seeing how this can all relate to one another. So the but how it starts often is really almost in the same pattern or category, that there's some form of trauma that's experienced, big T, little t, as well as, or how we would describe it, is either a vacancy or a violation wound. So either there's something that was enacted on them, or there was something that was held from them, typically by a parent or caregiver, and so that had led to, seeking out pornographic material, or finding pornographic material, or just sex with self, and then starting a pattern of self-soothing. And the way that this escalates, it typically falls into the category of like, this is a way that I can self-regulate, or I can meet my needs, when the rest of the world isn't necessarily meeting my needs for me, meaning care, compassion, self-soothing. And then oftentimes this typically happens when the person finds their special one, and they kind of think, this, okay, like I've messed around before, but this time it's different. I love this person. I'm going to get married to this person. We're going to make a life together. And, in a lot of cases, this addiction is the X that won't go away, and so there's a lot of imagining of like, hey, that, Paulina and I are going to get married. It's going to be great. And I start to put you on a particular pedestal that like you can never live up to, right? Relationships are hard. And there's ups and downs. And then all of a sudden there many of these behaviors start falling back into old patterns, of like, well, now I'm just doing it on work trips, or now I'm just doing it when you're away at the grocery store.
And so when you say doing it, that could be porn, that could be going to rub and tugs. I just wanted to say that. Or prostitutes, hooking up with other people. Okay.
Yeah. So the acting out behavior starts to present itself again with opportunities that of convenience, and then convenience starts to turn into compulsion, right? I'm engaging in this behavior when it's convenient for me, when it's secretive for me. And now all of a sudden I'm starting to find that like, I don't really have control over the convenience. The behavior, the acting out piece is now starting to say, hey, you need this. And the withdrawal that can be experienced is very similar to a lot of what the withdrawal you would see in say smoking or nicotine. You start to get agitated, difficulty thinking, things of that nature. So the person is actually experiencing physical withdrawal symptoms in addition to having a difficult time managing stress, life, and relationships.
Okay, so all of that makes sense to me, and I think it was very well explained. And what's coming up for me at the same time is you had described that, it can start with an affair or lifelong affairs. I mean, there are so many couples that have experienced infidelity where someone cheats, right? Like that's more common than not, I would say at this point. But that's not necessarily a sex addiction, right?
Right.
So like help us tease it apart, because I think it can be easy to hear like men that have had a few affairs might have an intimacy disorder, but my hunch is that maybe they don't.
I guess my answer is, it's kind of falls into this pattern of, all cats are mammals, but not all mammals are cats, in terms of like infidelity in a marriage can be an intimacy disorder. regardless of the diagnosis, anybody who's experienced infidelity in a relationship will have disordered intimacy after the affair has been discovered. So whether you want to go ahead and say, hey, this person had an affair and now they're a sex addict, or this person had an affair and there's problems in the relationship, I would be a strong advocate to say both should be treated at a certain point with the same level of care, in terms of that there's a therapeutic, that there's a therapeutic effort that's done to recouple the relationship.
So if someone called you, let's say, right, because you're in higher level of care, you would only allow someone to come into, Begin Again Institute if they were a good fit for the program. So there's some sort of screener process, right? If you had a guy call and say, I've had 2 affairs within my marriage, I've been married for 30 years. How do you suss out whether they would be appropriate for your program? And I know I'm asking hard questions here, but this is the way that people are thinking about this, is they don't know how to decipher what's shitty behavior and what's like a full-blown sex addiction.
And we welcome the scrutiny, to be honest. So the simple piece is yes, there is a screener. And the good news is that there's a screener for kind of a lot of it. So we actually created a screener that anybody can take on our website without even calling us.
Oh, amazing.
It's called the Porn Addiction and Use Survey, or the PAWS. So, the idea is that people can log in or sign up, answer the questions, and it gives you a clinical recommendation as to where to start. And so this could be, hey, you should talk to somebody that specializes in intimacy disorders, or you should, contact a coach or somebody that is maybe not therapeutic, or you should seek residential treatment.
Or like, you're really fucked, you go into treatment now.
That's not one of the answers, but maybe it'll be soon. But it is this piece of like, we really want people to get help. And we also recognize that we are that higher level of care. But for anybody who does call, we're going to take them through kind of the same questions that we talked about that would meet the clinical criteria of having an addiction. Hey, you've had 2 affairs and you've only been married 5 years. Like, talk us through that process. Did you experience negative consequences? Did you try to stop or end the affair? Did you, to really make sure that, hey, we're not letting somebody in to quote unquote, like, let them off the hook, right? Begin Again in Boulder Recovery, we're not a place to be able to say, hey, if you get caught cheating, come to us and we're going to make it go away. In fact, if you come to Begin Again, we're going to say, hey, there's a lot of work to be done. And we're a great place to start it, but it's going to be a long road of commitment to your authentic self, to your relationship, and to a community, to really be able to reestablish that trust. So with that being said, we find that most people that come, actually, I would say almost all the people that come, have a full grasp of like what it means to try and fail and then still call.
What I appreciate is that if someone is curious or unsure, or they're really needing to gain clarity, am I struggling with an intimacy disorder, or is this maybe something else? There's this screener that you offer that helps people begin to find clarity, or at least have some sort of direction. And so I'm gonna make sure to put that in the show notes, so that if anyone is listening and they're curious, like, gosh, I'm still a little bit unsure after listening to this, whether I or a loved one or a friend might be struggling, they can use that assessment. That's awesome.
And if you want to just talk to a real life person, feel free to give us a call as well. We've got an amazing team of admission specialists. They'll walk you through and they'll say, hey, it sounds like you're a really good fit for therapy, but it sounds like maybe there's some work to be done before you would come to us. And so we've got really great relationships across the country that we can give you the name of a local therapist and get you started that way.
Okay, so I know we have limited time and we always at the end get to tangible tools. So if someone's listening and they're like, "Oh gosh, this is me," and I really have the courage to seek out support, or other people might, someone who could fall into this. Where do people start? Obviously, the assessment, reaching out to someone to talk about higher level of care or a program, but what are other tips and tricks that you would recommend for someone listening?
For somebody listening, there's a high likelihood that your change is going to be rooted in somebody's discovery of the behavior. So, there's often a phrase that's thrown around of like, we change at the speed of pain, and so oftentimes the pain of having a loved one leave us or having a relationship end really spurs the desire to make the phone call. So first and foremost, it's my hope that if you're listening to this and this is you, just avoid the pain. Just call, first and foremost. The second thing is often the person that suspects that this is going on has a lot of what I would just kind of call like gut intuition. If that's what's going on in your life as the partner, go ahead and seek support professionally. The amount of partners that we see that come into our program say, I wish I would have made a phone call to somebody sooner, because their body is experiencing the same type of gaslighting trauma and just pain and suffering. And it sounds really hokey, but it is one of those scenarios of like, put your mask on first before you set the boundary or ask the person that you're in the relationship with to change. Again, our partners tell us all the time, they said, I knew something was wrong. I told them something was wrong. And I got gaslit for years. I got told that I was crazy. I got, so that would be the thing that I would say is, if you're suspecting, go ahead and find somebody in your community on Psychology Today, or there's an organization called ABSATS, and I can send you the information. You can put it in on the show notes, that they can find a therapist, but they specialize in betrayal trauma. And so connect with somebody there so that you can set a boundary and really start a healthy course moving forward.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. If you're somebody that's struggling with this intimacy disorder, there's an organization called ITAP. It's a great place to start. They also have a Find a Therapist. That's a great practical and tactical way to start their journey in getting honest and getting help.
Well, and the intuition is so powerful. I think especially for women, but for all humans, like that inkling, that hunch, that thing that's like nagging at you of like, I know something's not right. Like, I mean, as you said, call someone, process it with someone, see if what you're feeling can be, validated in a way where then a treatment plan can be made around it, so that you don't have to be struggling in silence with it, thinking like, well, I guess I'm just crazy.
And again, I mean, I think that this is the piece of the addiction, is that the person's not making rational decisions in their addictive mind. That they're going and saying, hey, what do you know? Okay, well, you know that I've been out late, that I'm coming home late, let me tell you a reason why work is crazy this time of year, because it's year of end. And if you want those nice presents, if you want those nice, trips, you need to just let me do me, and the person just goes, yeah, it's, you can't negotiate with somebody that's already being hostaged, and that's what the addiction does to the person, is that the person is hostage to the addiction, and you're trying to negotiate with the hostage. They have no control.
Right.
You have to protect yourself and find your own support system that isn't connected to the relationship. You know, I can't tell you how many partners come in and they say, well, after the first affair, I told all my friends, and 50% said leave and 50% said stay, and I stayed. And after the second affair, all of them said leave, and I stayed. And now I can't tell anybody about it at all. You know, it's if you think something's going on professionally, reach out, get support. It's going to be the best and shortest path forward.
Right. And the path with the least amount of suffering too, because you're having a support system and resources that are holding you up as you try to navigate this with yourself or your partner. Well, I'm really appreciative of this conversation because I think for so many reasons. I think it's a confusing topic. I think a lot of people have their own skepticism, but also just lack of information. I mean, because it's not this formal diagnosis, I feel like the conversation has been minimized and I'm not saying that's correct. I'm saying the DSM needs to add this. Of course, I feel that wholeheartedly. But I think because, we use that as our Bible, it has kind of limited conversations that need to be happening on this topic. And the lack of information or the misinformation is pervasive. And I think people are walking away today with a much greater understanding of here's what it looks like, here's how you can get help. And really, it's not only about the person struggling with the disorder, but also the betrayal trauma that comes along with anyone who they, are involved with. So if you liked this episode or you feel like this was helpful, please share it. I think I want to really put more energy into this topic personally as I'm leaving today, because I just think even myself, there's a lot more education I need to do as a clinician. So thank you, Ed, for joining me.
And thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Okay, we'll catch everyone later.
Take it out. Get